Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. A case of incest and depravity has shocked Australia. In a remote valley, police discovered a family that has been interbreeding for 4 generations. Brother, sister, father, daughter, uncle, niece, resulting in a gruesome outcome for all involved in what the police refer to as an incest cult. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that sounds a whole lot like Wall Street's Sons and Daughters program, where sons and daughters of the fathers and mothers, aunts and uncles ruling the world are hired to seed the banking system with a generation of genetically identical dysmorphic debt products and to churn out collateralized cross-side debt obligations commingled with their rehypothecated twins in John Corzine's debt pool and bogus mortgage-backed securities backed by contracts on which all of the T's are crossed but the misaligned I's are dotted with bulging growths of gruesome fraud. Yes, 4 generations of incest and depravity in the credit markets ought to shock the world with the gruesomely deformed economy it has spawned. I bet this economy can squeal like a pig. Stacy Herbert, what?
Max, looks like we got a sow here instead of a boar in this first headline. JP Morgan Chase, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and the corruption of America. The Justice Department has just obtained documents showing that JP Morgan Chase, Wall Street's biggest bank, has been hiring the children of China's ruling elite in order to secure existing and potential business opportunities from Chinese government-run companies. According to internal emails released as part of this investigation, one email said, quote, "You all know I have always been a big believer of the Sons and Daughters program," says one JP Morgan executive in an email, because, quote, "it almost has a linear relationship to winning assignments to advise Chinese companies."
Oh, yeah. Well, JP Morgan back in the news, always committing some kind of fraud or malfeasance, or this is what happens when interest rates are low. They're kept artificially cheap. It's like if you have cancer and you're eating foods that help grow the cancer. I forget which foods they say.
Carcinogenic.
Oh, carcinogenic foods. If you eat carcinogenic foods, or you live maybe next door to Fukushima, radioactivity, you might get some poisonous radioactivity and die. When you keep interest rates cheap, as they do at the Federal Reserve Bank or Mark Carney here in the Bank of England, you spawn cancerous, incestuous, bulbous malformities like Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan that are now swallowing the economy as a whole.
Well, not only is our global financial system and banking system backed by seemingly maybe 1 or 2 units of debt, and they keep on rehypothecating and spinning and churning the same exact clients and debt, but the same pool of so-called talent, the same CEOs jump from one corporation to another bank, to another, political office. And now going back to the article about the incest cult in Australia, they said some of the children had oddly formed features which scientific tests would later reveal was a result of homozygosity, or identical gene patterns of both the children's parents. So I'm saying that if you apply this to Wall Street and all of their debts and all of the same hiring practices using the same exact identical gene pool as the leadership of the country and of the businesses across the nation, then you get the same sort of disformed, malformed, and deformed financial system.
Oh, speaking of homos apostrophe, no, what was it called?
Homozygosity.
Homozygosity. Right here in the UK, I see Bob Diamond is making a return. Remember, he got tossed out for doing stuff?
Well, and John Corzine launched a hedge fund soon after his rehypothecated same piece of debt, of Spanish debt, blew up and deformed the global financial system.
Yeah, instead of moths or caterpillars turning into butterflies, these are butterflies turning into dog poop. Whether it's Bob Diamond or Jamie Dimon or John Corzine, it's a metamorphosis, isn't it? From something that works, intrinsically beautiful, related to nature, like a butterfly, into something that gets stuck to the bottom of your shoe walking through an undesirable, miskept street.
Well, of course, J.P. Morgan is being investigated under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. But Robert Reich in this article asks, don't we do the same thing? Don't we have a sons and daughters, daughters and sons program in Wall Street? Whether we have like Timothy Geithner has now joined Warburg Pincus. We have Chelsea Clinton was at a big hedge fund. We have Peter Orszag is now a senior executive at Citibank. But now, when we're all confused about who the father, the mother, the daughter, the aunt, the uncle, it all looks the same. We get this sort of headline that we see here in the UK, deficit 185 billion, not 90 billion, that committee of MPs warn. So the Office of National Statistics here is saying, well, if you use normal accounting procedures, the deficit here is actually 185 billion. The government, George Osborne, has said it's only 90 billion, but he's not explaining to them what accounting standards he's using.
Right, the deficit here in the UK is 12 to 13% of GDP, and not the numbers that they quote, which are lies. to put it in layman's term, the chancellor is lying because the deficit is at least double because they use accounting tricks. So the big accounting firms, they hire them, they give them a big briefcase full of cash, and then they come back with a nice thick report which details how to lie about the deficit. The debt of UK is now approaching 100% of GDP. The deficit is now 12 to 13% of GDP. So all this growth that's happening in the UK is because of all the increase in debt, as long as interest rates can keep low, which is great to keep the debt mounting in this huge Ponzi scheme. However, it does give rise to incestuous, kleptocratic, cancer-ridden financial terrorists like Jamie Dimon and the folks you see here in the UK.
Well, this article points out that, for example, assets like Network Rail and taxpayer-owned banks should be included in the accounts where they are currently excluded, quote, in defiance of normal accounting rules. So the normal accounting rules, but we have an incestuous, deformed accounting rules that just decide to say that we could just keep on repackaging the same debt and just call it something else. Now it's an asset, it's not a liability. That goes on the other side of the accounting ledger, even though it's the same product of the same father or mother or uncle or aunt.
Yes, not putting things on the balance sheet is called the Enron approach to accounting. Until such time as you can't hide the incestuous, exploding debts that are off the balance sheet any longer, and then suddenly, like Enron, everything goes completely to zero quite rapidly.
Yes, but the markets took it as if it was a normal response, as if the UK government gilt debt market, for example, is not deformed, and that if you mate with it, if you interact with it or interbreed with it, you might end up with a equally deformed debt situation. Now, speaking of the UK, staying on the UK and this debt and passing it on to children, your own children, now children are pestering their parents for a payday loan. Fears that payday lenders are grooming children accelerated yesterday after new figures revealed that the number of loan advertisements seen by Britain's children has soared by almost 20,000% in just 4 years. So in 2008, there were 3 million payday loan ads seen by children between the ages of 4 and 15. By 2012, that number had ballooned to 596 million.
Well, children, it's an untapped market. to get into the debt slavery business. So yeah, getting kids, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, hooked on debt using cartoons and other means that work for the cigarette industry. Why not get them hooked on debt? I think the umbilical cord is a good entry point for these payday lenders to get fetuses loaded up on debt. And then, of course, you'll have the situation where a fetus encumbered with debt will abort themselves. To avoid going to bankruptcy court. That'll be the biggest cause of abortion, will be fetuses aborting themselves because some frickin' payday lender loaded them up with debt through the umbilical cord because a mother's there smoking crack, smoking cigarettes, wondering why is George Osborne on TV with 3 arms sticking out of his head, some mutant chancellor from outer space talking about why the deficit doesn't count anymore. We don't count it in these accounting terms that we made up, pulled out of our hat.
Well, so the figures back up already published evidence that youngsters are being suckered by cartoon characters and juvenile jingles to believe taking out loans which charge as much as 5,000% in interest per annum is perfectly normal family behavior. There's that word again, normal. This is normal family behavior if you're not incestuous with your debt. Now, probably, I mean, this presumably children want their allowance, right? This is their allowance payday lending, but their parents are having to take out payday loans to give them their allowance. So you have the same debt being recycled over and over at 5,000%.
Hey kid, here's a Twinkie and 20,000 pounds of 5,000% annualized rate of debt encumberment. Oh boy, I can hardly wait for my young adulthood when I can prostitute myself down in the city of London for pleasuring some bankers to pay off this debt that my parents foisted upon me because they couldn't afford their crack habit here in the UK. Or is it Marmite? I can't tell the difference. They're smoking Marmite, they're freaking druids, okay? They're over there in Stonehenge worshiping rocks. They're all psychos.
So this is an incest cult that they had in Australia, and I'm saying that this is also what we have on Wall Street and in the debt markets in general. Now, one thing an incest cult does not want is any sort of diversity or new entrants into the market because they want their malformed children and their weird incestuous cult. Here's how one mega bank is trying to crush Bitcoin. The mega bank, of course, is JP Morgan and their Sons and Daughters program at the top of the show here. They have a renewal of U.S. patent number 6609113. And the article says that JP Morgan Chase's patent states the company's intention to develop a virtual wallet for consumers with a virtual currency that allows for anonymous free payments online.
Right, well, JP Morgan is obviously going to try to tie up the Bitcoin market by patent trolling.
Yeah.
Now, people, when they came out and said this immediately, I'm not talking about patent druids. I know it sounds something British, but this is patent trolling. These are trolls, not British people. And they're going to attempt to tie it up because they don't want the competition. And when this came out yesterday, I tweeted about it, and people immediately went to JP Morgan's defense. They're not really going to try to put Bitcoin out of business. We have to trust Jamie Dimon. The guy's an inveterate liar. We talked about the show for years about every single that comes out of his mouth is a lie. He's more incestuous than the frickin' royal family, and he says he's not going to attack Bitcoin. Why would we give this guy the time of day? We already know he's a frickin' liar. So, of course he's going to try to attack Bitcoin using patent laws, the same way that the recording industry tried to attack people engaging in their fair use constitutional right to copy intellectual property to put those people in jail, or in the case of Chris Dodd at the MPAA, chased Aaron Swartz to death. He's a murderer, Chris Dodd, and so is these banking industries, so is Jamie Dimon, so is John Corzine. Jamie Dimon threatened John Corzine with death if they didn't pay back that loan that he hooked up with MF Global. The guy's a whacker. He's a mobster. He's a schmuck.
Well, you know, patents are the same thing as part of this incest. Only one idea, one germ of an idea is allowed. Now, finally, can Bitcoin replace PayPal? And the reason why I bring this up is to bring up this point of diversity, because meanwhile, John Rushman, an economist and professor at Warwick Business School, says the brilliance behind the technical design of Bitcoin is the fact that the mechanism for payment is a distributed network. No one owns it. It does not run in a data center owned by PayPal or MasterCard or Visa. The added bonus, no middlemen taking a cut from the transaction.
So Bitcoin is the Jamie Dimon slayer. And he knows it, and he's running scared. All right, we got to go. Stacy, thank you so much, but we must go to the second half of the show.
Fight the cult of debt incest.
All right, stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Mexico City and speak with Jeff Berwick of DollarVigilante.com. Jeff, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. My pleasure.
All right, Jeff, the last time you were on the show, we discussed Bitcoin when it was trading at $7 a Bitcoin. Of course, now it's over 1,000. Many at the time called it a Ponzi scheme. Now, 2 years later, it's gone over 1,000 with loads of volatility along the way. But what's next for Bitcoin, and do you see it being used in Mexico, for example? Jeff?
Oh, absolutely. Since we last talked, Bitcoin has gone through a tremendous evolution. It's really caught on around the world. I think the biggest reason that it's been rising recently wasn't necessarily that Ben Bernanke gave it his approval, but it was mostly China. If you look at fiatleak.com, you can see most of the Bitcoins are going to China right now. And many places, and the reason that they're going to China is because of the capital controls in China with the yuan, renminbi, and you can just see it all over the world that this is catching on. It's going tremendously well, and there's going to be ups and downs. It's going to be volatile. It's going to go all over the place. This is a total revolution in money and banking, and it's fascinating and exciting to watch.
All right, Jeff, one of the complaints from the mainstream media about Bitcoin is that there's too much hoarding. You've got property that you are selling in Chile and accepting Bitcoin. Have people been spending it with you, or do they prefer to spend dollars?
We accept Bitcoin for everything we do. Our company is a worldwide company, and actually most of our employees accept Bitcoin as payment. We accept Bitcoin for all of our products. You're really seeing that it's really catching on, that everyone's starting to use this currency now, and that's what's really interesting about what's going on, is that everyone around the world, not everyone obviously, but a lot of people are really catching on to this currency. And once you start to use Bitcoin, as you know, Max, it really excites your mind how the possibilities are, because as you know, when you try to open a bank account with the banksters anywhere in the world, it takes days or weeks or months. They often freeze your accounts. They always ask you what you're doing with your money. With Bitcoin, it's a total revolution in money and banking, and it's if people haven't used it, they should just get on it and use it, and they'll see what we're talking about.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Jeff, because you have a lot of information on the web that you track that gives people information about expatriating around to different countries, and where expatriation to different countries is easiest, or where it's easiest to get a second passport. We've seen in the last year a record number of Americans basically turning in their passport, turning their back on America, and moving to some other country. Is Bitcoin now a way to make that easier for Americans seeking to escape the horrible kind of police state that we see emerging in America now, Jeff?
Oh, absolutely. I've actually just talked yesterday with a very big name person. I can't say who his name was, and was all over crypto encryption, but he wants to get a second passport for Bitcoin. And none of these people are criminals. You look at someone like Edward Snowden. It's an amazing time right now. He actually is a refugee from the U.S. He defected from the U.S. He ran to China, and now he's in Russia. You can only imagine 20 years ago saying these things, it'd be crazy. But the U.S. is out of control. The government's out of control. The Federal Reserve is one of the biggest enemies of mankind. And people are starting to catch on to this. And yes, many people are just opting out. I opted out years ago. I'm originally from Canada, and I moved to Mexico, where I am right now. Although I'm not here as a citizen, I'm just here as a tourist. I live a permanent tourist or prior taxpayer lifestyle, and many other people are as well. Thanks to internet and technology and things like Bitcoin, people can live a very international lifestyle and avoid all these very dangerous governments and central banks.
Now, you have a community, Jeff, in Chile called Galt's Gulch, obviously a reference to Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged, one of her most famous novels. Can you tell us a little bit about it, how that fits into this, what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I got involved in about 1.5 years ago, and I recognized that many people were just wanting to get out of the Western world, not just the US, Canada, a lot of Europe. It's all turning into a disaster. It's all debt-based. It's all central banks. It's all money printing, regulation, taxes. And just like in Ayn Rand's book, in Atlas Shrugged, a lot of the wealth producers just decided they had enough and left. And so I got involved in Galt's Gulch in Chile. And the economy is booming down there. It's just incredible to see. I was in Chile probably 10 years ago, and it was pretty quiet and very boring, actually. And now it's starting to look like Hong Kong. So a lot of capital and a lot of people and a lot of productive people are gravitating to that country. And so I helped start a community there called Galt's Gulch, and it's really growing tremendously.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this split, I would call it, in the, let's call it the libertarian community, because there are some people in that community, and I would put you in that community, who have embraced Bitcoin and see it as a natural adjunct to Austrian economics and the idea of sound money. And then there are people in this community, let's say a Gary North, for example, who one would find writing on the pages of LewRockwell.com, who has come out recently with a screed, an anti-Bitcoin screed. And it seems that there's an enormous split in that community. And I see some people sitting on the fence who are now putting they're going from the anti-Bitcoin over to Bitcoin. I think that's kind of the trend. But can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. There definitely is a bit of a rift in the Austrian economics community regarding Bitcoin right now. We're seeing people like Gary North. I don't like to be too derisive with people, but what he wrote about Bitcoin was embarrassing. He actually does not even understand what Bitcoin is. And one of the things that the Austrian economists are talking about is the regression theory. And they talk about the money, what money is. And all these theories are actually just theories. They were came up upon decades ago, before there was internet, before there was technology, and they said that money had to be something that was tangible, something that was used as a commodity. Well, you know, Bitcoin really is, in today's world, when we have so much government and central banks and taxes and regulation, it is a commodity because it actually allows people to be semi-free with their money. I'm not saying that Bitcoin is the only thing that people should hold, and I'm not saying that they should necessarily invest in Bitcoin. However, I do think that if they don't catch on to Bitcoin soon, they're going to miss this train, and they should also get into precious metals or anything that Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen can't counterfeit.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Mexico, because you live in Mexico now. More than 1 million U.S. citizens now live in Mexico. There's an exodus of baby boomers heading south. We talked about Chile already. And I guess just this idea that Americans are getting out of Dodge. They want to get out of the U.S. The NSA spying is deplorable. And just on a competitive basis, if technology companies are not going to be allowed to keep up with the world in terms of where Bitcoin is and where it's going, then you don't really want to be in a technological innovative laggard. You want to kind of go where the cutting edge is, and that seems to be not the U.S. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I think the U.S. government is one of the most oppressive governments on earth at this point. They seem to be shutting down any productive business that actually is trying to innovate. And talking about Mexico, hardly anyone really understands what's going on here in Mexico. I was just walking around here in Mexico City. It's booming. The entire economy in Mexico is doing very well. Not many people know this. The stock market in Mexico has gone up hundreds of percent since 2000, whereas the Dow is just basically almost where it was in 2000, and then if you adjust for inflation, it's down dramatically. Things are going on, and many people are very slow to catch on to what's going on. There's actually more Mexicans leaving the U.S. than going to the U.S. right now, yet you still have a lot of people in the U.S. worried about border control. I think that border on the Mexico-U.S. border is eventually going to keep Americans in.
Right. Okay, so keeping on the Bitcoin theme here, Jeff Berwick, and the reluctance for people who are more, let's say, mainstream to embrace Bitcoin. I don't know if you saw it or not, but on Business Insider, the deputy editor over there, Joe Wiesenthal, recently published a mea culpa saying he's been wrong about Bitcoin. Did you read that, and what are your thoughts?
I didn't read that, but I've been seeing a lot of that happening. This is changing very fast, so many people were very slow to catch on. You were one of the first, Max, and I also, in about 2011, around $3, caught on to what's going on. And this is not going away. This is not a Ponzi scheme. This is not a scam. This is not going to go to zero. This is going to be very interesting. It's going to be very volatile for sure, and we've seen all that volatility, and that's what a lot of people talk about. But what we're seeing now is a lot of people really starting to catch on, and that's going to continue. And because of that, I think Bitcoin's going to continue to rise.
And Jeff Berwick, one of the interesting aspects of this, of course, are the automatic teller machines, or ATMs. I know you were involved briefly with a project in the Bitcoin ATM. There's now other companies that are getting involved in this Bitcoin ATM machine. They seem to be proliferating around the world. Is this kind of the killer app where it's very easy for anyone to simply go up to a machine and convert to Bitcoin, and they're in business, right?
Oh, absolutely. You're seeing entrepreneurs around the world starting to create all sorts of ways that people can get involved in Bitcoin. They can transact. Once you get involved in it, you'll understand why it's so exciting. And yes, you're seeing hundreds or thousands of companies and entrepreneurs creating really ingenious ways of interacting, and it's really exciting. And if people out there don't know what's going on, they should start to pay attention, because this is, I compare Bitcoin to the internet in 1994. I say that the internet was a revolution in communications, and Bitcoin is a revolution in money and banking.
And finally, Jeff, I see that Roger Ver, who's one of the very early adopters in Bitcoin, recently has made a $1 million donation to the very organization that seems to be split on the libertarian side in terms of acceptance of Bitcoin. Are we going to see more of this type of philanthropy, do you think? We only have about 10 seconds.
Oh yeah, you see it all the time. There was a young kid at a college football game who held up his Bitcoin stamp thing, and he got $24,000 worth of Bitcoin sent to him.
All right, Jeff Berwick, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
My pleasure, Max.
Okay, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Jeff Berwick of Dollar Vigilante. If you'd like to get in touch with us, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.